So last week, I saw the movie Challengers, and as you can likely predict, I loved it. And I want to express all my love for this with a full breakdown of everything in this movie, including the psychology of the love triangle, Toshi's two affairs, the metaphor between tennis and relationships, Art and Patrick's relationship specifically, the irony of the sexuality in the film, and of course, that symbolic metaphorical ending. And I'm going to divide the entire video into 3 sections: the meaning, the symbolism, and the ending. So without further ado, let's get into it. The meaning. I feel like the best way to start an analysis of a film is to start with the overarching meaning or message of the film. What is the purpose of the whole thing? And out of every summary I've heard and read, I think Zendaya sums it up the best in her interview with E-Talk. Ultimately, we joke and we say that this is like Codependency, the movie. And it's because each of these characters are trying to get something out of life that they can't get on their own. And that, no matter what, is going to manifest itself into something toxic, something painful, because you can't live life that way. So for me, the overarching thing, it's codependency. It's filling a void, and they're desperately trying to do that with each other. And I did tighten Zendaya's quote, but she does expand into the problem with living through people vicariously and finding fulfillment through them artificially before finding it within yourself. And I think Zendaya captures this concept perfectly. All 3 of these main characters desperately depend on one of the other 2 to fill in this missing element of fulfillment in their tennis careers and in their lives. And I'm going to break this down by discussing each of the 3 characters one by one. Let's start with Toshi. At a young age, Toshi had everything an up-and-coming tennis player would need for a long-lasting career as a champion. However, as we all know, she suffers a life-changing knee injury that basically ends all promise and potential she had as a professional player. So to deal with this traumatic change, Toshi desperately tries to continue the life of a champion by aggressively pushing and abusively treating her tennis-playing husband, Art, and also, therefore, keeping her name in the global spotlight as if she never quit playing. She submits edits for Art's poster to highlight more of her and say game changers instead of game changer. The majority of the time, she's handing her daughter over to her mother so she can spend all of her time studying Art's competitions and opponents. And as Art's interest in tennis begins to fade later on in his career, Toshi refuses to accept that. She speaks to him disrespectfully. She leaves the sportscaster audio on for him to overhear his recent failures. And she uses tactics of neglecting the love in their relationship to force Art back into tennis and focus only on that. But Art clearly doesn't have it in him anymore, which of course brings me to Art. When it comes to Art's tennis playing as a youth, it's referenced by his coaches and his peers that he has a natural talent and potential. But there's a slight element of confidence, aggression, and self-belief that's missing ever so slightly in his game. And Toshi recognized that more than anyone before she even met him for the first time. So when Toshi initially becomes Art's coach, they're the perfect recipe for a successful career. And that's why he becomes a professional superstar for a few good years. Toshi is able to actualize Art's potential in tennis by sparking a killer instinct and unshakable confidence within him through her coaching, because that's exactly what she is, unshakable confidence with a killer instinct. However, in the later chapters of this film, when Art's interest in tennis begins to fade, Toshi can't revive that champion within him. Art needs Toshi's support to feel complete, but Toshi can only support Art as a champion for her to feel complete. And that is exactly when Toshi's abuse, mistreatment, and neglect all begin. So let's move on to Patrick, because he seems to be a bit of a third wheel so far in this conversation, which he certainly is not, and I'll get into that. Patrick is almost like the inverse of Art. It's referenced by many of the characters that Patrick may not have had as much raw talent as Art, but it's his overflowing swagger, confidence, and slightly careless approach to tennis that actually makes him a formidable opponent. Therefore, Patrick needs someone to keep him in check, someone to discipline him a little, and instill some modesty into him, so he can sharpen up his game in areas where he may have not thought he would need sharpening. Toshi recognized this in Patrick before she met him too, just like Art. Your problem is that you think you've won the game before you've even started playing. And with Patrick being isolated for so long in this story, we see him and his tennis career entire collapse from his own self-damaging arrogance on the court for way too many years. This is why we see him desperately approach Tashi to be his coach instead of Art's coach. He's realized his weakness only when it is now too late. But during so many of Patrick's conversations with Tashi when they are in a dorm room or years later when they're in the alley, Patrick reveals these lurking weaknesses within Tashi that she's so afraid to admit. And I really want to talk more about those specific weaknesses within Tashi in the next section of this video, the symbolism. While Tashi seems to have cast a spell over Art and Patrick in how attractive she is to both of them, she very clearly signifies symbolically and in reality that she is the least suitable romantic partner out of all three of them. And I think the film is perfectly aware of this, and I think it's communicated the most clearly through the symbolism. Probably the most important symbolic moment in the whole film is when Tashi compares tennis and romantic relationships, specifically saying tennis is a relationship. And this is what she means by that. A game of tennis is a competition between two people. However, there's also an element of chemistry required to play a real game. And I feel like the best way to put this is by asking you a question. Have you ever played a game of tennis against someone way better than you or someone way worse than you? You can't play. It's not a real game. There's no exchange. And it's no fun. So as Tashi claims, there is an element of chemistry required between you and your opponent, even though you're competing. Even though you're trying to defeat them, you do somewhat depend on them. You're learning about one another as the game goes on, and a rhythm and a synergy develops between the two of you. And that rhythm and that synergy is actually quite beautiful to experience as a player in a great game or a spectator watching a great game. That's what Tashi loves. That's what Tashi lives for. And when you consider it that way, you very easily see how her tennis game is identical to her way of love. On the court, she's ferocious, she's imposing, threatening, and relentless. Yet also, to her game and her personality, there's this elegance, precision, and wit. And putting all of that together, Art and Patrick can't get enough of her in her tennis and in her romantic affection. However, just like in tennis, Tashi is unrelentingly dominant. She needs the upper hand at all times. So many of the visuals of her swings specifically showcase the ball coming directly at the screen, like a horror jump scare. She's always in the position of dominance over us as the audience and the characters around her. And she refuses to ever reveal her vulnerabilities, even to her closest partner. This is the major issue within the striking similarities between her tennis and her love. And even having come this far in the video, I still haven't spoken about one more relationship in this love triangle, Art and Patrick. Art's partnership with Patrick is the only partnership in this triangle that is actually healthy. Of course, until Tashi steps in. The relationship before Tashi is a demonstration of codependency that is mutually beneficial. It's even symbolized by their exercises and body language together. They win games together in doubles, they win games on their own, and show enormous promise. Even when they're competing for the same girl, there's still this lively and romantic push and pull of teasing and flirting and fighting. It's just the most subtly suggested, healthy romantic relationship throughout the entire film. And just like them, we as the audience are so distracted by the overwhelming presence of Tashi and their competition for Tashi. Just as distracted as the two of them are. It's like the perfect relationship is right in front of us, but we're continuously looking past it because they are looking past it. The story about Patrick teaching Art how to masturbate was very clearly more intimate than they let Tashi in on. And you can tell this by looking at Patrick's face when Art is speaking about how they weren't physically together at the time. There is this ongoing element of sexual irony and denial. And on a side note, I think that's what makes this film so fascinating to watch and so difficult to predict. Even from a directional standpoint, the film is always challenging how we associate sexuality and gender in film traditionally. So many of the men in this film are captured sexually in the usual way we would see women in a movie. Countless visuals of removing clothing, showing shoulders, upper legs, sweating, glistening, butt close-ups, steamy rooms, wet hair, and at times full frontal nudity. And there are many men captured like this throughout this film. On the women's side, there's only one character who is showcased sexually, the dominant star character, who is traditionally a male character in film. It's also a woman demonstrating many of the traits we use to coin the term toxic masculinity, as she is manipulatively controlling over her romantic partner when it all stems from a deep sense of insecurity and fear of vulnerability. And I would also say Tashi's insecurity of seeing her previous opponent, Anna Mueller, succeed in tennis, and even at times seeing Art succeed in tennis, was a prime cause for her affair with Patrick in Atlanta, as we see her seeing them on television just before she meets with Patrick. And on top of it all, still on the point of challenging sexual norms, we see a woman smile as she watches two men make out. Something I've seen countless times in movies when you reverse the genders, but never like this. Okay, now let's move on to the ending. Now, having throughout this video spoken about Art's need for a partner to spark some genuine ferocity within him, Patrick's desperation for a partner to instill some discipline into him, and Tashi's bloodthirst for some ferociously beautiful tennis that she has always lived for, I now must use those 3 points to break down the ending. So just keep those 3 points in mind. When Art tells Tashi he wants to give up on tennis and Tashi can't accept it, she meets Patrick the night before his and Art's match to convince him to throw the game, pretending he was trying to win because a win in the finals may instill enough confidence into Art for him to continue pursuing tennis. Eventually, Tashi sleeps with him, not entirely to convince Patrick to throw the game, but also because Patrick, being the inverse of Art, as I said before, is the perfect romantic escape from Art, who Tashi is gradually beginning to hate more and more because he isn't giving her the tennis she desperately needs to re-experience. And before I talk about the final sequence of the movie on the tennis court, I want to preface it with a quote from Josh O'Connor, who plays Patrick, in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, where he gives his interpretation of the ending of the movie. At the end of the film, they have found each other. They've been all searching for a way and getting it terribly wrong, searching for a way to satisfy that need, that hunger for each other. And they're all trying to find their way in different ways. And I totally agree. The final sequence is them finally finding fulfillment in what they've been desperately looking for so long, and now finding it in a positive, genuine, and non-manipulative way. So the next day at the game, we see Patrick signal to Art that he slept with Tashi the night before. I know at first this moment may seem somewhat frivolous or even comedic, but this moment is the most pivotal turning point in the climax of this movie for all three characters. This moment sparks the fire of ferocity and killer instinct back into Art, indicated to us when Art fires a ball right next to Patrick's head. And the new confidence and swagger in Art is the perfect catalyst to put Patrick's self-damaging arrogance in check, immediately feeling the need to sharpen his game and match what Art has just become. And the two of them now engage in this fiery, relentless, heart-racing game of tennis that Tashi has of course been dying to see for over a decade now. And we see her excitement flourish as she rubs her legs and tenses. It's almost sexual, which makes perfect sense considering her concept of tennis and relationships in her own mind. And in the very final shots of the film, it becomes as visually symbolic as it can be, with Art in an above-ground, threatening, dominant position, and Patrick in a submissive, vulnerable position, followed by the two of them hugging each other. Visually, the entire thing indicates Art finding his true intrinsic confidence and killer instinct, Patrick finding his modesty and discipline, the two of them rekindling their beautiful relationship, and Tashi finally experiencing the tennis she has always lived for. Alright, this is my analysis. I would love to discuss everything in this movie in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. See you later.